Welcome to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Bill Bender. Bill, how was your fantasy weekend?
Well, I had a really good weekend, but it's always tempered when your favorite team actually loses, so you got to balance it out. So getting a couple fantasy wins definitely made it a little bit better.
I will say your favorite real-life team is the Packers, right? Now, should they have let the Bears just run in for a touchdown at the end of that game?
I think they should have, but they committed too many penalties. And from a fantasy standpoint, if you're watching that game, the Packers need to find a running game. Brandon Jackson, top pickup 2 weeks ago, isn't the answer at tailback. The Marshawn Lynch trade rumors are starting to heat up again, and I think if Marshawn Lynch is on the wire, he's a sneaky little grab because he could have some success in a Green Bay uniform.
It just makes too much sense for both those teams. But let's talk about guys that are fantasy relevant now. A few developments over the weekend. Looking at our notes for this show, one of the guys that I've been big on since he got drafted, and basically as far as where he got drafted, he's been better than expected, but even though he has been the butt of jokes over the years, is Kyle Orton. I mean, this guy is a legit starting quarterback in fantasy now, I would say, especially getting that extra boost from a Josh McDaniels tutelage.
Oh, and what he reminds me of right now is being a Big Ten guy. Kyle Orton's playing like he used to at Purdue. He's doing short passes. Josh McDaniels is keeping it simple for him. And we saw it last week, 476 yards, 783 yards in the last 2 weeks. Granted, it's only come with 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. But like you said, I think Kyle Orton is a legit every week fantasy play. But I'll say this, the schedule over the next 3 weeks, at Tennessee, at Baltimore, and versus the Jets. So if you're in a bye week situation, you can try it, but understand that those 3 matchups are really, really tough, and anything goes.
I mean, of course, there's also the cascade effect where Jabbar Gaffney, especially in PPR leagues, has been very useful. I haven't actually looked at it, though, but would you say that Eddie Royal might even be sneaking in as a flex play?
Well, I think they're going to be frustrating because what you're looking at there is a wide receiver committee with Demaryius Thomas, with Jabbar Gaffney, with Brandon Lloyd, with Eddie Royal. I mean, Brandon Lloyd is among the league leaders in receiving yards right now. Yet you can't really trust him as an every week play. That's going to be the problem.
He's still Brandon Lloyd.
Exactly. So you're going to run into that problem moving forward. But the way it seems, and with no Sean Marino being hurt, I don't think Denver's going to have a problem chucking it around. So maybe those guys are week-to-week flex plays.
Those of you who may have had Kevin Kolb early on and weren't able to get a hold of Mike Vick, we've been talking about those owners. I mean, this season in particular, I feel like there are more owners looking for a quarterback, even if it's a QB2 out there. Is Eli Manning probably was drafted in leads as a QB2 this year, probably not QB1. Is he doing something? If you're owning Eli Manning right now, would you be worried about him, excited about him? I don't really know, because it seems he's getting a good number of yards. He got 5 touchdowns, but he still frightens me because he's kind of reverted to pre-2007 Eli Manning.
Well, the interceptions have been the killer. He's thrown 6 interceptions, which if you look at his passing yards, 810 yards, 5 touchdowns, he's not all that different than Kyle Orton, but it's those interceptions that'll kill you on a week-to-week basis. And like you said, looking for a quarterback, you better be looking for a quarterback because we've already had 5 quarterbacks go over 400 yards this season, which is just goes to show we hear it's a passing league. It's a passing league. It really is a passing league. So you have to have a trustworthy starter on a week-to-week basis. I did see Eli Manning on the waiver wire in one of my leagues, and I went ahead and stashed him as a backup because I think he'll be fine.
I mean, you talked about this turning into a passing lead. One of Ben Valentine, who's also in the Sporting News Experts League and occasionally contributes to Fantasy Source Football, he and I have this running conversation that the league is taking a lot of cues from Madden, really. And what do you do in Madden? You spread it 4 and 5 wide all the time. You find really fast fullbacks and put them in at running back. And you know what? Peyton Hillis is starting to do that. Guys like Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, who do 1 or 2 things really, really well, just hit that hole that's open up for them. They're not going to make great plays out on their own, but they're going to get you 4 yards consistently. And that's what Hillis has seemingly been doing, except that Hillis has also broken a few big plays. He had something like a 40-something yard run earlier.
Yeah, Peyton Hillis really was the surprise of Week 3 because you don't run for 144 yards against the Ravens by accident. No. That's a nasty defense, always shuts down running back. He's a tough runner. And he's really made Jerome Harrison kind of irrelevant. We'll see when Harrison comes back from the thigh injury. But it's crazy to think that Peyton Hillis, who was a fullback at Arkansas, might be the best fantasy play with considering teammates Darren McFadden. Maybe that's a stretch, but Felix Jones, who only has 88 yards rushing, was definitely the first player taken in fantasy drafts of those three players, but yet he might be the weakest fantasy option right now.
Okay, so Hillis is looking like a guy that you might go to if you're dealing with injuries at running back. Who are some of the other guys that are a little bit banged up at running back, and the guys that you might look to maybe make desperation plays with if you need somebody else to replace them?
Well, here's the thing. With Javid Best, Steven Jackson, and Ray Rice, your natural instinct would be to go pick up their handcuff. Go pick up, Willis McGahee or Kenneth Darby or Maurice Morris. What I would do instead is look at a guy like Marshawn Lynch, Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, and even I would start LaDainian Tomlinson, who is another guy we were talking about before we came on. He has almost twice as many yards as Sean Green, which nobody saw that coming. Tomlinson actually looks good. We've joked around about it a little bit in the office. How much juice does he have left? He's looked good behind that line, and he has a great matchup against the Bills this week. So there's a guy that you absolutely have to play in the league. We have him as a top 10 running back this week.
I mean, would it be at all shocking if he legitimately took the starting job?
Not at all, but I think this is a theory right now, is that maybe he's the first half guy, and then in the second half of the season, Sean Green, maybe they save him for the playoff run if the Jets get in the playoffs, which they should. So you could see that in the second half of the season. But again, the Jets, we saw it last year, they're going to run the ball a lot, and Tomlinson definitely every week flex play and could sneak into that running back 2 territory as we get in through the bye weeks.
As a Jamal Charles owner, I'm hoping that that's the plan with Thomas Jones also, is they use Jones early and then go to Jamal Charles. Let's talk about the wide receivers. There are lots of wide receivers notorious for having guys just show up out of nowhere and suddenly they're fantasy relevant. We were saying that Darius Hayward-Bay, of all people, is one of those desperation wide receiver 3 plays that you might need if you get the right matchup at this point. He's actually, I believe, in most leagues had more fantasy points than Michael Crabtree, who would have been drafted in just about every league. Who are you seeing right now that's making an impact that might still be available on a waiver wire?
Well, I think the best strategy to take is to take those desperation wide receiver 3 plays from the teams that are known passing, that are going to score a lot of points. And I'm talking about, the Saints, the Colts, the Texans, the Packers. When you look at Austin Collie, who was a late-round pick, he's got 359 receiving yards, and he's emerged as basically a wide receiver 1 for the rest of the season, it looks like, especially with the injuries they have. A guy like Lance Moore, there's your desperation play. I know we didn't see it coming last week with the 149 yards and the 2 touchdowns, but still, the chances are better when you have that. A guy like James Jones, despite the fumble last night, could be a sleeper this week against the Lions. And like we were talking about, Kevin Walter, another guy that's kind of on and off again, but he's making the most of those targets. What was that stat you told me?
I think it's last I checked, he has 16 receptions on 17 targets. It's something crazy like that. I would check our target stat for that specifically. The thing that I would caution people about is, especially with the Saints and to a lesser extent the Colts that go 3 and 4 wide often, you are playing roulette with those extra guys. We talked about Devery Henderson earlier in the year. Devery Henderson, Lance Moore, those guys, they absolutely, everyone knows they're going to have at least one game of those 150 yards, but you are going to have to be lucky in order to have them at that moment and play them in that moment.
Right, and they are boomer bust guys, but then again, you're on boomer bust guys with great quarterbacks on teams that score a lot of points. So
yeah, you're maximizing your boomer bust.
At least you're taking a calculated gamble at that point.
All right, Bill, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you.